Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tag. My name is Alan, and today we're going to be breaking down some of the best rivalries in lightsaber dueling in Star Wars history. It's a pretty long video, so grab a snack, sit back, and relax. Now, one of my favorite conflicts in Star Wars is the one between Count Dooku and Anakin Skywalker. Both in their first and last battle together, someone loses a hand, and as we all know, you can't have a good lightsaber battle until someone loses a hand. Today we're going to be taking a look at every duel in between the first one and second one, and analyze how Anakin and Count Dooku have evolved, or in Dooku's case, devolved as duelists. As the Battle of Geonosis begins to turn against the Separatist Alliance, Count Dooku attempts to escape the planet before all of his forces are overrun by the Grand Army of the Republic. Not only is the Count trying to escape with his head, he also has in his possession the earliest prototype of the Death Star. Jedi Knight Obi Wan Kenobi and his Padawan Anakin Skywalker are in pursuit of the Count and end up following him into a secret hangar. But the two Jedi are out of sync. Anakin has always been a hot-headed and emotional Jedi. He was extremely skilled and very passionate about becoming a great Jedi, but his lack of discipline and pose oftentimes got him in trouble. It also doesn't help that he was born as a slave, almost died piloting a starship in a major battle at the age of 9, labeled the vague title of Chosen One by his Jedi Master, who was killed only weeks after taking him on. Anakin's time in the Jedi Order was also fraught with difficulty and judgment from his peers. Anakin was considered far too old when he joined the Order. His constant emotional outbursts and pure power in the Force also ostracized him from the rest of the younglings. To make matters worse, by the time of the Battle of Geonosis, Anakin was 20 years old and a young adult in his most vulnerable and chaotic time. His veins are coursing with testosterone and a desire to conquer everything in his path. His Jedi training could barely contain his angst and energy. And just days before the Battle of Geonosis, he held his mother as she died in his arms. She was in captivity with the Tusken Raiders, where she was tortured and brutalized for days on end. This, of course, was too much for the young Padawan to handle, and he ends up slaughtering the entire village. The first sign of the cracks that would eventually overwhelm him and turn him to the dark side. Now, prior to landing in Dooku's secret lair, Anakin and Obi-Wan had been accompanied by Padme Amidala. No idea why a senator is engaged in the pursuit of a dangerous war criminal in the middle of a battlefield, but hey, maybe we can learn something from this and actually send our own legislators to do something useful for a change in Syria. While in pursuit, the Republic gunships are hit, causing Padme to fall out onto a sand dune along with a clone trooper. Anakin, who by this point has spent a lovely few days with Padme in the Naboo Riviera, was completely head over heels for the senator and wanted to go back and rescue her. Obi-Wan has to calm him down and remind him of his duty to the Jedi and the Republic. And so, as Anakin and Obi-Wan walk into Dooku's lair, the young Padawan is dealing with the recent death of his mother, the massacre of a village, along with the knowledge that the woman he loves is trapped on a sand dune in the middle of an irradiated wasteland. And of course, his emotions completely are out of control, and he disobeys his master and quickly rushes Count Dooku head-on and gets blasted in the face with Sith lightning. Now, Anakin isn't a complete idiot. He was by far the most talented Padawan in the Jedi Order, and his lightsaber skills easily matched many Jedi Knights. But Count Dooku was one of the best duelists in the Jedi Order when he had left. His skills were equal to Mace Windu and the Grand Master Yoda himself. One of the reasons why Count Dooku was so brilliant was the fact that he used Form 2 in lightsaber combat known as Makasi. It was specifically designed to duel other lightsaber users in a one-on-one situation. It was focused on efficient and precise movements, redirecting the enemy's kinetic forces back towards them, and while not physically strenuous, it was incredibly difficult to master. This ancient form was developed during a time when massive armies of Jedi and Sith roamed the battlefields, slaughtering each other. It was the perfect form for a wise and elderly statesman like Count Dooku. The one advantage that the two Jedi had against Count Dooku was that they could attack him at once. Form 2 was not that great against the multiple attackers, and usually the duelists had to focus on isolating individual fighters and quickly taking them out one-on-one, which Anakin conveniently did himself by running into his lightning. Obi-Wan Kenobi and his Form 3 defensive lightsaber was excellent against multiple fighters and blaster attacks. It was considered an almost impenetrable defense, But a skilled Form 2 Blade Master like Dooku could find gaps to exploit, which is exactly what happens. But before Count Dooku can finish off Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin comes to the rescue with a powerful Form 5 Power Strike. The style requires less dexterity and was favored by larger and stronger Jedi. The form usually involved overpowering the enemy with heavy swings until they're caught off balance. Of course, Count Dooku, with his Form 2, was an expert at deflecting and redirecting the energy of incoming blows. Obi-Wan clearly understands his Padawan's disadvantage and throws his own lightsaber towards Anakin so that he can dual wield. Dual wielding requires a lot of precision, focus, and training. Anakin, fortunately, was infatuated with lightsaber training, and throughout his time in the Jedi Temple, he had spent a ridiculous amount of time trying to learn every form of lightsaber combat, including dual wielding using Form 4. Form 4 was one of the most extravagant forms of lightsaber combat. It involved rapid, quick strikes combined with force-assisted jumps and rolls. Done correctly, an individual using this form becomes a blur of light and energy. Anakin's first master Qui-Gon Jinn preferred Form 4 and used it quite well, but ultimately, as we see during his duel against Maul, Form 4 uses way too much physical and force energy and quickly drains the fighter. It also wasn't great in enclosed spaces with limited room. Form 4 or Ataru was also extremely difficult to master, and usually Padawans were discouraged from using it because the aggressive lunges and flips and attacks usually left the fighter open to counterattacks. Ataru was originally designed during the Mandalorian Wars for engaging single heavily armed opponents. But still, it was probably Anakin's best shot at defeating the Count. The quick succession of strikes of Form 4 would put a Form 2 fighter on the defensive, which is exactly where you would want them. But Anakin's Form 4 is unfortunately very basic, and Count Dooku quickly reads through his attack and immediately pushes Anakin back with his own counter and destroys Anakin's lightsaber, leaving the Padawan with just his master's lightsaber. Although it seems to make sense for Anakin to use Form 4, Count Dooku was actually very proficient at fighting against it. This was because his Padawan was none other than Qui-Gon Jinn, and through many sparring sessions together, Dooku quickly learned how to counter the form, and he actually considered it quite ridiculous. Dooku's strategy against Form 4 was to attack the legs of his opponent, constantly forcing his enemy to flip overhead, leaving them vulnerable to a lunging attack. Count Dooku most likely could have finished Anakin pretty quickly, but he chooses to play around with the Padawan. Perhaps the Count senses the Jedi's anger and emotions and sees him as a potential ally and recruit. Now, holding just one blade, Anakin decides to cut the power and uses darkness to his advantage. His power in the Force all allows him to sense things with great accuracy, but he again underestimates Count Dooku's own ability to fight in the dark. Anakin falls back into Form 5, his more natural and most practiced form. In the darkness, Mikasa has an advantage once again because it relies on feints and surprise maneuvers. The subtle shifts in stances that Dooku uses and variation in angle of the blade made it very difficult to judge in the dark. The simple nature of Form 5 combined with its power strikes are quite easy to see coming, especially because the lightsabers glow in the dark. Form 5's neutral stance involves an overhead position with the lightsaber for more power. The go-to move for a Form 5 practitioner was a falling avalanche, which starts from this overhead grip and involves several downward strikes. This was usually really easy to avoid or counter if you knew it was coming. The duel ends as Dooku easily parries another one of Anakin's blows and slices his hand off. It almost seems like Dooku freezes Anakin in a position for a moment, although we don't see Dooku use the Force in any physical way. It should be noted that Dooku was one of the most powerful Force users, especially when it came to telekinesis. It's very possible that he puts Anakin in stasis in this scene. But if we do see Dooku at the end of the battle, he does seem a bit out of breath and tired from the battle with the young Padawan, but he does still manage to go toe-to-toe with Yoda in a Force battle shortly after. He's still clearly at the top of his game. Now, the next time Anakin and Dooku meets, it's on the sand sea dunes of Tatooine. You would think that Anakin would be at a clear disadvantage because of his hatred of sand.
It's coarse.
But the reality was he was quite used to running around on the sand as a child in Mos Espa, and would oftentimes beat up non-humans on it. It was a surface he was very used to. Dooku starts off his attack once again with lightning, but Anakin has learned that his lightsaber can absorb pure Sith energy quite well. He really learns from his past mistakes. This time, as the two clash, Anakin plays it a bit safer and less aggressive. Instead of parrying, he oftentimes just evades the attacks. Remember, Dooku is deadly with Form 2 and can quickly gain control of an opponent's lightsaber, especially when they engage too much. Dooku realizes that Anakin has progressed considerably since their last encounter and proceeds to try to unbalance him emotionally with some verbal attacks about his past pain and loss. Anakin, however, does not disappoint. He gets really pissed, but he funnels his emotions into a powerful Force blast, which combined with sand causes a lot of discomfort because
it's coarse.
But again, Dooku's telekinesis powers were incredible. As a youngling, he once won a telekinesis competition reserved for much older Jedi. And so Dooku quickly turns and releases his own powerful blast of Force energy and bombards Anakin with his greatest weakness, causing him to drop his saber. But Anakin recovers and soon the fight continues once again. Dooku is constantly trying to push Anakin's buttons and goad him into killing him, as any good Sith Lord would. But Anakin is in control and ultimately rushes off to save Ahsoka, ending the battle. The next time we see Anakin meet Dooku is when he and his master Obi Wan Kenobi infiltrate Dooku's ship during the Battle of Vancor. The Jedi confront the Sith Lord in his meditation chambers. After his last stalemate with Anakin on Tatooine, Dooku decides to quickly escape so he can face more favorable odds. Once again, Dooku uses Force Lightning, his favorite attack, to create some distance between him and Anakin, and quickly escapes. It's not until the third year of the war that Anakin encounters Count Dooku once again. This time the two meet on Naboo. Dooku, who by now has developed some respect for the Jedi Knight, has set a trap for Anakin. Dooku starts the battle by manipulating the light sources around the room with telekinesis. The two exchange some words and lock blades, and Anakin is momentarily distracted and doesn't see the 4 Magna Guard droids that have entered the room. The rest of the fight isn't really fair. Anakin can hardly get any strikes in on Dooku before he's overcome by the Magna Guard droids' electrostaffs. Magna Guard droids were quite dangerous and oftentimes fought in pairs. They proved to be quite difficult opponents even for the Jedi when they were unprepared. As one Magna Guard droid occupies the Jedi's lightsaber, the other will attack their unprotected flanks. Anakin still puts on a good show and manages to push back all 4 droids as they electrocute him, but ultimately he is stunned and captured by Dooku. Later that year, Anakin once again returns to Naboo and encounters Count Dooku. This time, he is accompanied by Chancellor Palpatine, who the Separatists are trying to capture. Dooku has once again brought his Magna Guard droids with them, and they quickly engage Anakin. Skywalker this time immediately takes out both of the Magna Guard droids. It seems like whenever he's defeated by something, he trains extra hard to get rid of that weakness. Anakin is a true professional fighter. Anakin then goes after Dooku, and again Dooku tries to create some space between them by using telekinesis to throw objects at Anakin. This is not a move by someone who is confident about their own close-quarter fighting abilities. Anakin is not deterred by some flying silverware and almost manages to stab Dooku in the face through a chair. Palpatine, of course, is carefully watching and pleased with Anakin's progress. As Dooku and his Magna Guard droids tried to withdraw from the Naboo palace with Palpatine in custody, Anakin continues to press his attack with his powerful and much more refined Form 5. Using the falling avalanche method, he manages to knock down Dooku for a second and chokes him simultaneously, a very dark side move. But Dooku manages to blast Anakin with some Sith lightning, throwing the young Jedi across the room. But before Dooku can escape, Obi Wan Kenobi arrives in disguise and manages to free Palpatine. In the last year of the war, Obi Wan Kenobi and Anakin travel to the world of Obadiah in search of clues about the death of Jedi Master Sifo Dyas. Before they uncover the truth, though, they run into Count Dooku once again. Count Dooku's confidence seems renewed, and he's more than willing to engage both Jedi. He takes a sort of fencing stance, which is quite stylish, but not all that effective. But because he's so good at Form 2, it doesn't really matter. Obi-Wan and Anakin are in sync, though, and patiently test Dooku's flanks. Dooku, as always, picks off Obi-Wan Kenobi first with a kick and almost sends him careening off of a sheer drop. Anakin, who is like a brother to Obi-Wan Kenobi, lends him a bit of force to keep him steady. Dooku again is playing the isolation game and trying to separate the two so that he can destroy one of the Jedi's one-on-one. Dooku is fighting much better than we've seen him in the past, and his agility and speed definitely stand out. He's most likely gotten some performance-enhancing spice from the Pike Syndicate while visiting their lovely opium dens on Obadiah. What's interesting here is that once again Dooku casts aside Anakin and tells Obi-Wan that he should join him. Since Geonosis, Dooku has wanted to train Obi-Wan as his own apprentice. For some reason, he never liked Anakin. Perhaps he sensed just how uncontrollable the young Padawan's power could be. Dooku was always a disciplinarian as a master, and Obi-Wan Kenobi was always in control of himself. The Pikes surround the Jedi and Dooku and go after the Sith Lord, but once again Dooku shows just how powerful he is, and he defeats all of them and manages to get away from their combined firepower. In a last-ditch attempt to stop the Sith Lord, Obi-Wan Kenobi launches Anakin towards Dooku's escape ship, but before they can fully engage each other, Dooku disables the ship and hops onto another one and makes another escape. In the last episode of the Clone Wars, for now, Anakin and Yoda stumble across Dooku and Palpatine doing some blood magic. This time, a group of 501st Legion clone troopers take Count Dooku's lightning instead of Anakin. While Yoda goes after Palpatine, Anakin quickly lands a strike on Count Dooku and disarms his lightsaber with a very similar move that Dooku used to cut his hand off 4 years ago at Geonosis. Anakin is about to scissor Dooku's head, but Yoda is there this time to stop him, but Anakin kills him anyway. But of course, this is all a vision that Yoda has, and it foreshadows what's to come very soon. The final encounter between Dooku and Anakin arrives in the middle of the Battle of Coruscant. Obi-Wan Kenobi is once again with them, and the prize is Palpatine. Obi-Wan and Anakin start off super in sync and aggressive. Anakin presses Dooku as Obi-Wan attempts to find gaps in his flanks, but Dooku is again flawless at holding the two back. Obi-Wan once again falls quickly to a forced push. Dooku gets Anakin one-on-one for a bit, and Obi-Wan manages to come at Dooku's back, but this really pisses off Dooku. He kicks Anakin away and chokes Obi-Wan and slams him across the room. He's not getting up anytime soon. Anakin quickly returns with his own kick and locks blades with Dooku. The trash talk continues once again, and Dooku uses Anakin's fear to draw out his hatred. And now it seems to really be working. Anakin goes on an attack with a rapid series of Form 5 power strikes. Dooku is quickly on his back foot, trying his best to absorb the blows. It is possible that Palpatine's presence in the room is lending a bit of dark side rays to Anakin. The thing with Form 2 is it only works well when Dooku can redirect Anakin's energy, but Anakin's attacks are so ferocious and fast, all Dooku can do is absorb the kinetic energies and prevent his head from being cut off, which also quickly begins to tire him. Anakin then just slips right through Dooku's overhead and manhandles him by pulling him off balance and slices his hands off. The battle is over, and this time Yoda isn't around to stop Anakin, but Lord Sidious is. It's not the first time that Anakin let the dark side in, and it definitely won't be the last. As you can see throughout the Clone Wars, Anakin Skywalker gained a lot of experience, while Count Dooku is basically behind the scenes and meddling with other people and directing the troops. Anakin was on the front lines learning how to fight. As you get more into Star Wars lore, it quickly becomes apparent that ranking Jedi and Sith swordsmen is a feudal practice. There's no hierarchy where you can definitively say that this Jedi or this Sith Lord was the most powerful, and here are the top 3 behind that individual. Instead, what we see are a huge field of combatants all trained in unique ways with very distinct advantages and disadvantages. Then there are the actual factors on the battlefield, which of course can negate a lot of those advantages or disadvantages as well. For instance, the Sith assassin Darth Maul was not supposed to be able to defeat a Jedi Master as seasoned as Qui-Gon Jinn, especially when he had the support of his Padawan Obi Wan Kenobi. Qui-Gon Jinn might have been more experienced and skilled in his Ataru Form 4, but Darth Maul's dark side aligned Juyo form gave the assassin an edge. Qui-Gon gets tired from expending immense energy trying to sustain the acrobatic Ataru form. Meanwhile, Darth Maul can continuously feed into his own anger, something he's been taught to focus on since birth. And so Darth Maul stuns the Jedi by killing one of their most skilled and, in hindsight, one of their most important warriors. He could have been that stabilizing presence that Anakin needed, and he also could have taught the entire Jedi Order how to become one with the Force. But sometimes shit happens, and a lower rank stuns an upper rank. Although Obi-Wan Kenobi's upset of Darth Maul just moments later was equally as shocking. This time it was the hubris of Darth Maul that led to the downfall of the more experienced fighter. And it's with this mindset we approach the two very important duels at the end of the Revenge of the Sith. First, we have Mace Windu versus Darth Sidious, followed by another showing between Grand Master Yoda and Darth Sidious. These three individuals are widely seen as the most powerful Force users and the best duelists of their time. Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord, stands alone, the last in the line of the rule of two Sith. He was an immensely powerful Sith Lord who had somehow been able to keep his presence completely hidden by the thousands of Jedi that surrounded him on a daily basis as he masqueraded around as the Chancellor of the Republic. And then you have the two Jedi Masters, Grand Master Yoda, one of the oldest and wisest Jedi to ever serve the Order, and Mace Windu, a younger Master who was well known for his intensity and skills with the saber. Now, Mace Windu is definitely known as a top-tier duelist, but Grand Master Yoda is simply at another level when it comes to his understanding of the Force. Only Anakin really had a higher midichlorian count. This, combined with centuries of training, made Yoda's dueling abilities probably the best in the Order. As a matter of fact, he's probably instructed almost every Jedi who's gone through the halls of the Order in the last few centuries, including Mace Windu. It's not an exaggeration to say that Yoda is Jedi Order, not just because of his long tenure and the relationships he's built with all of the high-ranking members within the Order, but it's also because of his immense power. You could say that he alone could single-handedly defend the Jedi from outside powers. Mace Windu was really just a middle-aged human with a few decades of experience. In theory, he should not be in the same class as Yoda. But when both individuals go up against Chancellor Palpatine, it seems like Mace Windu actually fares better. What exactly happened here? Well, as you'll see in this video, every combatant is different. Every combatant has their own strengths and weaknesses, and when two combatants meet on the battlefield, it's really hard to know how these strengths and weaknesses will match up and react with one another. So first, let's take a look at Mace Windu's fight with Palpatine in his office. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Palpatine is clearly outnumbered by the Jedi. Mace has bought not just himself, but three very seasoned Jedi Masters to support him: Kit Fisto, Agent Kolar, and Saesee Tiin. Even if these three Jedi Knights individually are weaker than Mace Windu, together they are quite formidable. Although it should be mentioned that Kit Fisto was an underwater combat specialist who oddly mastered Form 1 technique, which is the most basic form. It's not very useful against someone like Darth Sidious. Agent Kolar was a renowned swordsman, but often quite impulsive and prone to striking first and asking questions later. He would actually go down first during this battle. Saesee Tiin was seen as an invincible fighter when behind the sticks of his personal starcraft. He was also an individual with a natural telepathic power that made him very sensitive to other people's thoughts and energy attacks. And if you take a look at Sidious right before he jumps and attacks the Jedi, well, he actually lets out this scream. That's no ordinary scream, that is actually a Sith battlefield technique. Quite commonly used against the Jedi back during the Old Republic days when there were entire battlefields full of warriors going back and forth with their force powers and lightsabers. Had Agent Kolar and Saesee Tiin been in the Army of Light, they would have known the proper methods to defend themselves from this very common Sith attack used back then. But the Jedi of this period, despite being quite used to warfare, were just not used to fighting Sith Lords. Only a handful of Jedi actually managed to duel individuals like Count Dooku and Asajj Ventress, and many of those Jedi didn't live to tell the tale. And so when Palpatine lets out this Force scream, take a look at Agent Kolar and Saesee Tiin. They're not even looking in the right direction as he runs them through with his blade. That scream completely disorients them, and Palpatine is able to take down two of the more powerful Jedi here in quick succession. And then he immediately skewers Kit Fisto after with ease. Kit Fisto is probably the weakest out of the four here. So how does Mace Windu survive this initial assault? Well, I think Palpatine does recognize that Mace Windu is probably the most dangerous out of the four and saves him for last. And what makes him so powerful? Well, it's his focus and training. You see, unlike the other Jedi, Mace Windu didn't let 1,000 years of peace catch him off guard with his pants down like some fool. He took his lightsaber training extremely seriously. And in all fairness, most Jedi also took their lightsaber training seriously. You see, lightsaber training wasn't just about combat, but also about finding self-discipline and one's connection to the Force. But Mace Windu took it to the next level. Not only did he master every form of lightsaber combat, he started developing his own as well, and he started looking into the forbidden Sith form of lightsaber combat known as Form 7, Juyo. Form 7 was off limits to the Jedi because this was one of the most unpredictable and aggressive forms of lightsaber combat. It was almost 100% offense. As mentioned before, individuals like Sidious and his apprentice Maul were able to use this vicious technique to great effect against the Jedi. What made Form 7 so dangerous was not just the aggression and chaotic nature of the strikes, it was also the mindset of the individual using Juyo. You see, every strike in Juyo needs to be enhanced by the Force in order for the duelist to not run out of energy. Therefore, an individual needs to fall into a trance and tap into their passions and emotions. The Jedi, of course, are always opposed to being attached to emotions when fighting, so Juyo stands directly against the teachings of the Jedi Order. The Sith, however, heavily relied on their emotions. Their anger and fear was what made them so powerful. This is why it always was a very natural fit for a Sith to do Juyo. Now keep this all in mind as Kanan Jarrus shows Sabine Wren in this scene how a lightsaber works.
You're not fighting with a simple blade as much as you are directing a current of power. Your thoughts, your actions, they become energy. They flow through the crystal as well and become a part of the blade.
And so when a Sith Lord is using Juyo, each one of his strikes from his lightsaber is filled with immense dark side energy. Something that would have been shocking for most Jedi to experience firsthand. I imagine parrying Darth Sidious or any person who's using Juyo when they're that angry is like, you know, immersing yourself in cold water or opening the oven into your face while it's on the broiler mode. It is intense. The reason why Mace Windu was able to withstand all this dark side energy comes specifically from his efforts to develop an alternative form to Form 5 Juyo. See, from a very young age, Mace Windu was very passionate and emotional. During his gathering ceremony, he struggled with building his lightsaber and became frustrated. Professor Yang would remind young Mace that it was important to clear his head and remove emotions when trying to focus on something a bit more complicated. And later on, Mace Windu's master, Silan Mir, also sought to temper the fire burning inside of young Mace, perhaps a side effect of his homeworld of Arun Kal. Let's just say, compared to the rest of his people, Mace Windu is actually pretty relaxed. But anyway, like many Jedi, Mace Windu would take his own weaknesses extremely seriously, and he would spend his entire life working on containing his emotions and dealing with his rage and frustration. This makes him uniquely suited to study Juyo and figure out a way to tap into this form's destructive combat abilities without actually allowing the dark side to taint him. And so when he created Vapad, it was as much of a state of mind as it was a Form 7 fighting style. When using Vapad, a Jedi would enjoy and relish the fight and the satisfaction of winning, something that could be considered borderline dark side. This actually allowed a Jedi to mimic the energy and speed of a Sith Lord without falling into the more dangerous and extreme emotions of hatred and fear. This does mean that the fountain of energy that Vapad taps into is a bit less powerful than Juyo. Although at the same time, it was still considered very dangerous for a Jedi to practice Vapad if they weren't properly prepared. As a matter of fact, Mace Windu only taught one individual how to use Form 7, and that was Deepa Billaba, his apprentice. And then again, she seemed to use Form 3 far more often on the battlefield, and that's because Form 3 is a much more useful form in everyday life, especially when you're on a battlefield and the majority of life-ending projectiles come in the form of blaster bolts and not lightsabers. In all honesty, Vapad was kind of overkill for the battlefields of the Clone Wars. You could just use a much simpler form, and that's what most Jedi chose to do. Now, there is one situation in which Vapad is amazing, and that is going directly against Juyo. So this might be confusing, especially when I just said that Juyo most likely is more powerful than Vapad. But when these two forms interact, the Vapad fighter has a huge advantage against Juyo. You see, while the other Jedi in the office on that fateful day tried to resist the dark side energy coming from Palpatine, Mace Windu did something different. He accepted the fury and dark side of Palpatine, and that's because Vapad fighters learn how to channel more destructive energies and then use that energy to aim it right back at their opponents. Mace Windu has quite a lot of fury inside of him to begin with, but the more powerful his opponent is in the dark side, the more powerful his strikes will become as well due to Vapad's nature. The scene where Palpatine tries to do a sneak lightning attack on Mace Windu is a great visual example of what he's doing to Palpatine this entire fight, using Vapad as a conduit to redirect Palpatine's energy right back into his own face. It's actually said that when Anakin walked in on this fight between Palpatine and Mace Windu, he couldn't even see Mace Windu's lightsaber. It was just a glowing purple orb. This is how fast his attacks had become by the end of the battle, and this is when Palpatine had no ability to really resist anymore. But the funny thing is, if Mace Windu were to go up against Grandmaster Yoda in a fight, unless Yoda's, given into the dark side, I imagine Yoda's Atara would be actually quite formidable against Mace Windu. And the two would be far more evenly matched because Mace Windu can't tap into the dark side if it's not there. Now let's move on to the fight between Yoda and Darth Sidious. These are two individuals with the same level of skill and power in their respective sides of the Force, which means they aren't exactly going to be even on the battlefield. And that's because the dark side is naturally going to be more powerful in a physical fight. It's a destructive energy. It's not to say that the light side doesn't have its merits or its strengths, but in a direct fight between two equally experienced Jedi and Sith, the Sith will usually win. But the Sith also have to contend with jealousy and competition from their fellow Sith Lords, whereas a Jedi has the full support and backing of his allies, and more importantly, the Republic's immense military forces and economic capabilities. Now, Count Dooku, who trained beneath both Palpatine and Yoda, gives us a better insight on just how powerful Yoda is. You see, at one point in time, Dooku actually went up to Yoda and tried to convince him to join the dark side. He later recalled how foolish of an idea that would have been, and he said the following quote: "If Yoda ever turned that way, Sidious himself would be annihilated. The universe is yet to comprehend the kind of evil that a Jedi Knight of nearly 900 years could wield." So yeah, I think Yoda has more Force potential than Darth Sidious ever will, but he's a Jedi. And here's the thing, when Yoda enters the duel with Palpatine, as a level-headed, disciplined Jedi, he's not willing to really give into that true potential as a Sith Lord, and he'd rather maintain his light side connection with the Force. And this time, Palpatine has not emptied his Senate complex. He has a bunch of guards crawling all over the place. And that means Yoda is working against the clock. He has to assassinate Palpatine and then get out of there as quickly as possible. On top of that, Yoda also just recently experienced the death of almost every Jedi that he helped teach and raise through the Order. This would have been an emotionally traumatic period for him. It's like losing your entire family. Yoda also had been on the run for days after narrowly escaping his own Order 66 situation and hiding in the bush on Kashyyyk until his Wookiee friends could find him a ride off-world. Taking all of this into consideration, it was clear that Yoda and Palpatine were too evenly matched for either side to have a true advantage. And when Yoda fell from the heights of the Senate chamber, he wisely understood that having the high ground in Star Wars is OP and decides to retreat and fight another day. Ultimately, Mace Windu won the duel, and he lost his life, whereas Yoda lost the duel and kept his life. And so let this be a reminder that power rankings are kind of dumb, unless, you have like a bowl game you're trying to figure out or something like that. And then at the end of the day, it's much more interesting to look at the individual characteristics of each fighter and try to figure out how those characteristics will meet in the arena of battle. Today we'll be breaking down the evolution of Maul versus Obi Wan Kenobi. As a youngling, Obi Wan was strong-spirited and a bit mischievous. He was a tinkerer and loved fast speeders and piloting starships, and to be honest, didn't seem all that different from a young Anakin Skywalker. But Obi-Wan, like most of us, experienced some great change as he grew older. In his case, he got stuck inside of a tiny ship that was flying through the corridors of a larger ship. Needless to say, it was terrifying for Obi-Wan, and his love for flying ended there. The second thing that changed him was his master, Qui-Gon Jinn, one of the most unorthodox masters in the Jedi Order. He was constantly challenging the Jedi Council and requesting that they pursue alternative views of the Force. Obi-Wan actually became more stable and mature due to his master's own more unorthodox behavior. He would even oftentimes critique Qui-Gon Jinn when he did something against the Council's wishes. Of course, Obi-Wan still loved and respected his master, and he learned a very important lesson from him, and that was there was nobility in restraint. This is perhaps why Obi-Wan prefers Form 3 lightsaber combat above all else. It's one of the more simple forms of lightsaber combat, and it's primarily designed for defensive purposes. A master in Form 3 can usually take on multiple gunmen and swordsmen at the same time and still be able to hold their ground. This was in contrast to the acrobatic Form 4 known as Ataru used by Qui-Gon Jinn. It featured much more aggressive offensive attacks. Maul was born on Dathomir to the very powerful Mother Talzin. Mother Talzin was the matriarch in charge of the Night Sister faction that ruled over the planet. Palpatine had encountered Talzin pretty early on in his own journey, and together they trained in the Force and shared methods and techniques. Now, Talzin had been under the impression that Palpatine was going to take her on as an apprentice, but that didn't happen. Instead, Palpatine steals Darth Maul away from her and trains him in complete secrecy and isolation. At the time, Sidious still had his own master, Plagueis, and they kind of had agreed to this rule of two-like situation, which means no secret apprentices. But instead, Palpatine steals Darth Maul away from her and trains him, and so Maul's childhood was devoid of interaction aside from a droid that trained him into a killing machine. Maul was skilled in all forms of lightsaber combat but preferred to use a double-bladed lightsaber while utilizing Form 7, Juyo, the same style that Palpatine preferred. Form 7 is one of the most dangerous forms of lightsaber combat and relies on a massive amount of energy and emotion to power the user's movements and strikes. Juyo practitioners were extremely unpredictable and chaotic, which made them extremely hard to fend off. Their attacks were usually relentless and bold, keeping even the most skilled swordsman off balance. Juyo was primarily considered a dark side lightsaber form because the users usually channel the dark side of the Force. During the Naboo blockade, Darth Sidious would send Darth Maul to capture Queen Padme Amidala in order to force the monarch into signing over her planet to the Trade Federation. It was actually also Darth Sidious's homeworld, but I guess he didn't have a great childhood there. Obi Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn have been assigned as mediators between the Naboo and Trade Federation and were forced into protection duty once they realized the Trade Federation was carrying out an illegal occupation of the planet. The Jedi managed to grab Queen Amidala and escape to Tatooine. Right before they leave the desert planet, Maul catches up to them, and Qui-Gon Jinn has a brief duel with him. The appearance of Darth Maul terrified the Jedi Order. They believed the Sith to be extinct. This phantom menace was a sign that there was some greater evil lurking in the shadows. Maul eventually encounters the Jedi again when Loyalist forces try to retake Naboo from the Trade Federation. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan square up against Darth Maul at the Royal Theed Palace. Qui-Gon was considered one of the more talented duelists in the Jedi Order, and his Padawan was considered an up-and-coming Jedi as well. They had numbers on their side, and immediately they try to outflank Maul and find a hole in his defenses, but Darth Maul's saber staff is well equipped for fighting off multiple enemies. On top of that, despite their mutual respect, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn were having some problems of their own. You see, Qui-Gon Jinn was doubting his own capabilities as a master, and there was the possibility that he and Obi-Wan would separate. And so they seemed kind of out of sync during this first fight, and Darth Maul does a good job at constantly trying to separate the two Jedi so that he can defeat them one-on-one. Remember, the Juyo form leaves the user vulnerable to enemy attack, and it's best used one-on-one. Darth Maul eventually leads the pair into one of the main reactor rooms. Obi-Wan is cut off from Qui-Gon, and in the confined spaces of this room, the larger and older Jedi, relying on the energy-intensive Ataru form, has trouble keeping up with Darth Maul. Darth Maul, sensing his opponent's weakness, feints and stuns Qui-Gon Jinn with the pommel of his saber, and then ends it with a clean backhand thrust right through Qui-Gon's gut. Obi-Wan, who is trapped behind a force field gate, watches in horror as his master falls. Now, at this point in time, Darth Maul is flowing with the dark side of the Force, along with a newfound confidence. Although his master had trained him to be one of the deadliest Sith warriors in the entire galaxy, he had yet to really challenge himself until dueling this Jedi Master. Now that he had killed Qui-Gon Jinn, his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi doesn't really seem to stand a chance, but instead of being calm and collected, Obi-Wan is full of rage. When the force field shifts, Obi-Wan immediately goes on the attack using Form 4 Ataru, but in a more conservative manner, more fit for an indoor battle. At the same time, Obi-Wan's Form 3 defenses are flawless, and his parries are timed perfectly, throwing Maul on the defensive immediately. Obi-Wan never gives Maul a second to breathe or bask in the glory of his victory, and before Maul realizes what's going on, Obi-Wan has cut his saber staff right in half. This finally gives the two a moment to separate as Maul finally refocuses his attention on this very serious Padawan. He manages to use the Force to push Obi-Wan into the reactor shaft. The battle seems over, and Darth Maul once again relaxes. But Obi-Wan takes advantage of this situation, flips over Maul, grabs Qui-Gon's lightsaber, and slices the Sith warrior in half. Obi-Wan Kenobi would be awarded knighthood for his defeat of Darth Maul. He would spend the next decade focused on training Anakin. He had promised his dying master he would do so. Qui-Gon believed that Anakin was the chosen one. Everyone thought Maul was dead. Usually that's what happens to a person who gets cut in half. Luckily for Maul, though, he had been cut in half by a lightsaber, and his wound was immediately cauterized. Using all of his hate and some Force powers, he manages to survive the trip to the bottom of the reactor shaft and falls into a large reservoir of cooling water. His broken body was taken inside of a container of garbage and dumped on the trash planet of a Lothal miner. Maul awoke and somehow managed to attach himself to a cybernetic spider body, and he basically chills on this garbage planet, slowly losing his mind for 12 years. That's when his brother Savage Opress finds him. Darth Maul now is only known as Maul. He's failed his master and no longer a Sith. With the help of Mother Talzin, Savage manages to heal Maul's mind and also gives him some more human-like robot legs. When Maul finally awakes again, he only has one thing on his mind, and that is revenge against his hated enemy, Obi-Wan Kenobi. The Jedi Master had taken a very bright future from it, or at least what he thought would have been a bright future, at the side of Palpatine. Maul and Savage Opress decide to draw Obi-Wan Kenobi out by carrying out a massacre of a small village on the planet of Raydonia and then sending a holovid straight to the Jedi Order. The Jedi were in the middle of the Clone Wars, so Obi-Wan decides to go to the small village by himself. He finds a completely abandoned village full of dead bodies and destroyed buildings. He's skeptical that he'll find the real Maul. He believes he's dealing with an impersonator, but he's surprised to find his old adversary still alive and kicking. Apparently the only thing that's kept Maul alive up till this point was his hatred for Kenobi. But the second Obi-Wan ignites his lightsaber and takes on Form 3 stance, Savage Opress comes out of nowhere and attacks him from behind. Now Obi-Wan is outnumbered 2-1. Savage Opress is all about brute strength. When Obi-Wan fights very strong opponents, he seems to have problems, especially when he plays into their hand by going strength versus strength. Surprised and unprepared and distracted, Obi-Wan is disarmed pretty quickly and captured. The brothers take the Jedi Master onto their ship where they sort of throw him around and beat him up a bit. But before they can take off the planet, another former Sith assassin by the name of Sage Ventress boards their ship. She had been betrayed by Count Dooku and was now working as a bounty hunter. Her target was her former apprentice, Savage Opress. She rescues Kenobi, arms him with one of her red lightsabers, and a very strange 2-on-2 lightsaber fight ensues. Asajj is quite a fast fighter. She utilizes her old master Dooku's Form 2 Makasi. Also built for dueling, Makasi emphasizes efficient and quick movements, using counterattacks and parries to throw opponents off balance with precision strikes. While Savage and Asajj chase each other around, Obi-Wan goes toe-to-toe with Maul up in the rafters above. Now Maul seems a bit unbalanced by his new metal legs, but the viciousness of his attacks throw Obi-Wan off balance as well. While locking blades, Maul starts taunting Obi-Wan about the death of Qui-Gon Jinn, and as Obi-Wan becomes more angry, he abandons his defensive Form 3 style and goes on a sloppy offensive. Obi-Wan realizes that he and Ventress are a bit outmatched, and they better save themselves so they can fight another day. The next time Obi-Wan encounters Maul, it's on the world of Florm, home of the pirate gang led by Hondo Ohnaka. Maul and Savage have been collecting resources and robbing banks. Their idea was to start a criminal organization. On Florm, the two Zabraks hope to recruit several of Hondo's pirates and manages to start a mutiny. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan had been tracking the two brothers along with Adi Gallia, another member of the Jedi Council. They arrive just in time to help out Hondo Ohnaka fight off all of these mutinied pirates. Maul immediately engages Obi-Wan again, and in the open space, without surprises, the two are evenly matched. Obi-Wan once again falls back to Form 3 while Maul presses on the attack. Adi Gallia, on the other hand, is struggling to keep up with the brute force of Savage Opress. One can only absorb so many parries against the large Zabrak, and Adi Gallia is running out of energy and moves. Savage manages to stun the smaller Jedi and spears her right through. Obi-Wan is once again double-teamed and is forced to withdraw with Hondo Ohnaka's forces into their pirate base. In order to defeat these two Zabraks, Obi-Wan also collects Adi's lightsaber so he can dual wield. Obi-Wan usually doesn't go dual wielding, but a capable swordsman with two sabers or a saber staff who is proficient in Form 3 can usually create an impenetrable defense. Obi-Wan doesn't disappoint. With two blades facing the brothers, he's able to control the space around him and not allow the brothers to overwhelm him. He uses Form 3 mostly to keep them at distance, along with some newly learned martial arts moves to keep Savage Opress off balance. Obi-Wan clearly has learned some new strategies for dealing with the brute, and they all seem to be below the waist. But Savage manages to catch Obi-Wan off guard with a force maneuver and finally topples him. Obi-Wan finds himself locking blades with both brothers again, but the martial arts training comes in handy and he attacks Savage's knees and buckles him. This breaks Savage's lock and Obi-Wan slices the large brute's arm off. Maul surprisingly shows care for his brother and immediately pushes Obi-Wan out of the way, ending the engagement and protecting his brother. The duel on Florm would be the last time Obi-Wan and Maul cross blades during the Clone Wars, but it's definitely not the last time they would see each other during the Clone Wars. You see, Maul eventually manages to build that criminal enterprise he and his brother dreamed of, and together they took over the planet of Mandalore, which happened to be ruled by Duchess Satine. This was Obi-Wan's first and only true love. By capturing Satine, Maul lures Obi-Wan to Mandalore and murders her right in front of his eyes. It's one of the most painful moments in Obi-Wan's life, but the reality was Maul had freed him from his one last attachment in life. The loss of Satine perhaps grounded Obi-Wan in a way that allowed him to be a better Jedi and survive his exile on Tatooine. His job was to protect Luke Skywalker, the son of Anakin and Padme Amidala, who he now believed was the Chosen One. Maul was forced to leave Mandalore after the Republic took it back. He would start another criminal organization known as the Crimson Dawn, but pretty much by this point, he'd become a broken man. The only thing that really drives him still is his pursuit of Obi-Wan. Maul finally manages to track down Obi-Wan to Tatooine, and after many days of walking through the desert, finds him sitting aside a campfire in the middle of the night. Maul is tired. He appears haggard and weak, but he once again starts his old routine and begins taunting his old adversary. Obi-Wan by now has ascended to a new level in the Force and has found an inner peace after so many years in exile. But when Maul figures out that Obi-Wan must be here to protect something or someone, the old Jedi Master is forced to draw his blade. He assumes the Form 3 defensive stance and then shifts to Form 4 Ataru, the same form that got his master killed all those years ago. Maul recognizes this and immediately leaps into action. He strikes Obi-Wan with the same pommel attack that he had once used on Qui-Gon. But this time, Obi-Wan is ready, parries, and slices right through Maul's saber staff and through his chest, mortally wounding him. With his dying breath, Maul asks Obi-Wan whether the child he's protecting is the Chosen One. When Obi-Wan replies he believes he is, Maul states that he will avenge them all. Now, Maul seems obsessed with getting revenge from Obi-Wan Kenobi, and at least in the early years, that's all he really thought about. But as the years went on, as he became more mature and wiser, he started realizing his one true enemy was never Obi-Wan Kenobi. It was Palpatine. It's Palpatine who ripped him away from his mother at such a young age. It's Palpatine who basically tortured him and trained him into this weapon, and then discarded him the second he makes one mistake. At the end of the day, Maul realizes Obi-Wan and him are kindred spirits in a way. They've both been screwed over by the Sith. And in this video, let's talk about what honestly is one of the best duels I've seen in a long time from Star Wars, and it's the duel that just happened in Ahsoka between Baylan Skoll and Ahsoka Tano. It's not the fanciest duel, it's not the most acrobatic. This ain't your Duel of Fates from Episode 3. This duel also doesn't have the same amount of baggage like Kenobi Vader Part 2, with the whole "I'm gonna get revenge from Kenobi for making me into a cripple" vibe. But what does happen in this fight, it's done really well. So they say you could learn a lot about an individual by having a good old-fashioned fight to the death with them. This is why I'm so well versed with dolphins, and I really understand how they think. In these situations, there's really no holding back, no keeping up your guard or adhering to social norms. When you're fighting to the death, you go all out and essentially become your true self. You know, that version of yourself that you're always trying to shape and change and tidy up for other people? Actually, you know who doesn't do that? Crackheads. Crackheads don't do that. In a way, they're freer than us. Freer. And lightsaber dueling, that just takes it to the next level. A lot of people think of this type of fighting as being very similar to sword fighting. There are some similarities, but the reality is there's no solid sword here. There's no weight in these strikes. What's actually happening is these Force-sensitive individuals are channeling pure columns of energy.
Energy constantly flows through the crystal. You're not fighting with a simple blade as much as you are directing a current of power. Your thoughts, your actions, they become energy. They flow through the crystal as well and become a part of the blade.
And so in a stunningly beautiful and dangerous way, this is not just an exchange of lightsabers we're seeing here, this is an exchange of emotions, ideas, and thoughts. This is a conversation. A heated conversation. And this is why for the longest time Sith Lords like Darth Sidious have tried to corrupt and instill fear into the minds of his enemies. I mean, listen to the noise he makes right before he confronts these 4 Jedi Masters. Some of these guys sit on the council. These are all really high-ranking and experienced fighters. So why does Mace Windu survive the longest and eventually succeed in taking down Palpatine? Well, it is because of his lightsaber form and technique. He's very well practiced. But Mace Windu is trained in far more than just what are the basic strikes for each form or how you should hold your lightsaber. That's kind of the stage where Sabine Wren is, and she's hardly even mastered that. No, instead, Mace Windu is deeply connected to his blade through the Force. He falls into the rhythm of the Force during his duels and allows the Force to begin guiding his action. And it gives him a better understanding of where Darth Sidious's presence and blade is. And more importantly, he uses Form 7, Vapad. It's a technique that he developed himself, and what's really cool about this form is it allows Mace Windu to literally absorb dark side energy channel it and redirect it right back at his enemy in the form of power strikes. It's kind of the perfect form for a Jedi who has to hunt down Sith. Of course, channeling dark side energy inside of your body can be dangerous. Now, Mace Windu says it doesn't affect him, but he never really allows anyone else to use his form. The stronger Palpatine's strikes are, the stronger Mace Windu will reflect them back at him. So the point is, there's a lot more going on in these duels than just form and technique and physicality. There's a duel going on in the minds of the participants and also in the Force. And as we've mentioned in our Ahsoka dueling style breakdown, good old Snips has learned from some of the best, so this duel between her and Baylan Skoll should be epic. But it's not exactly what I expected. Actually, Ahsoka doesn't act like herself at all here. She kind of becomes imbalanced, which makes this extremely interesting. Like any good duel, it all starts with some verbal sparring. Now, people think of this kind of stuff as fluff or filler. A lot of people don't like that every Jedi battle starts out with a conversation. It might even seem a bit corny, and it might get into the way of fighting. But as I said, lightsaber combat is about the body, the mind, and the Force. If one of these things are imbalanced, the entire body is imbalanced. And Ahsoka Tano has learned how to, shit talk with some of the best in the galaxy, including Obi Wan Kenobi. He was a cautious and defensive paladin, and he always used Form 3, which lacked teeth. And so his strategy was always to just tire out aggressive opponents, make them attack his prepared defenses until they started making mistakes. And sometimes he would goad his enemies with a few choice words.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
Obi-Wan Kenobi was Anakin's master. He knew that Anakin hated being told what to do, and what he says here is exactly the type of comment that would make Anakin make a stupid mistake. Now, Baylan Skoll we know much less about, but he clearly is cut from a similar cloth to individuals like Dooku and Ponkrell. He's strong and he's capable, that much is clear. He survived Order 66, but now that the Jedi are gone, their culture, their institutions, their regulations, it means Baylan Skoll can finally be his true self. And he decides to embrace what he really wants.
Power. Such as you've never dreamed.
Now, most people want power for the same reason. It's for control. It's so that they can make the world around them a little bit less scarier. Now, Baylan Skoll is not a weak individual. He was a Jedi. He's always been looked up to. But I do think that his experiences during Order 66 traumatized him and made him more worried about getting power so that he can control his surroundings and his own future. At the same time, he's clearly not some power-hungry, dark side Sith Force user, and that's what makes him incredibly dangerous. Look how he easily manipulates Sabine Wren into doing exactly what he wants. This takes skill.
You should do as your master says. Destroy it. I know you feel that Ezra Bridger is the only family you have left. Come with me. Willingly. I give you my word. No harm will come to you. Sabine, you will be reunited with your friend.
Yeah, he might seem a little disingenuous, and the show does frame him as the bad guy, but he does stop his apprentice from choking out Sabine Wren.
Shin, release her. Shin. I gave her my word, and unlike her former master, I shall keep mine.
Maybe Baylan Skoll wants minions. Maybe he wants people to help him out. Maybe he truly believes in his own righteous path in the same way that Count Dooku believed in what he was doing. I believe that it's actually a bit of everything. I think Baylan Skoll really doesn't want to fight Ahsoka Tano. I think he is interested in making the world a more stable place. And that kind of makes him weak. Because he hasn't embraced the dark side fully, he isn't able to use all of its powers. But at the same time, he has a really sharp mind, and he knows exactly how the Jedi think, which probably makes him even more dangerous. I wouldn't be surprised if, in another life, Baylan Skoll was a Jedi ambassador. Not just a normal Jedi, but a Jedi who made peace between various factions, who understood how to read people with the Force, and understood how to push people's buttons and get exactly what he wants. Notice how he doesn't even have to use a Force mind trick. Baylan Skoll is deadly competent. When he talks to Ahsoka Tano, he can't use the same tricks he uses against Sabine. Instead, he tries to shake her center and make her more emotional. As we all know, when a Jedi becomes distracted, more emotional, they lose their connection to the Force, which makes it harder for them to fight.
Anakin spoke highly of you.
Interesting. He never mentioned you.
Now, the fanboy inside of me wants to go, oh, but the Star Wars nerd inside of me understands that Ahsoka's taking the bait here. She's in his trap. As calm and relaxed as Ahsoka might seem in her old age, there's a reason why she used to be called Snips. Back in the day, she was more ego and emotion driven. And I don't think that side of her ever disappeared. It's just been suppressed a little bit. It's still in there, and her experiences, her relationship with Anakin is honestly a wound that never managed to heal. And so Baylan Skoll is just picking scabs here.
Everyone in the Order knew Anakin Skywalker. Few would live to see what he became.
Okay, now you can kind of see the evil side of Baylan Skoll. Look at the smugness on his face. He knows exactly what he's doing.
Surely that must leave a mark. Is that why you walked away? Abandoned him?
See, the interesting thing here is Baylan Skoll is on defense. He should be trying to buy time. But instead he's goading Ahsoka into attacking him, which doesn't really help him out that much. But then again, he might have sensed Ahsoka's aggression through the Force. He probably knew that Anakin was her master, so I'm guessing he also knew that his Padawan had a hot temperament as well. And that aggression makes her truly in balance, and Baylan Skoll starts pushing all of Ahsoka's little buttons, making her more and more flustered. Now, when the skirmish starts, Ahsoka does her own thing here. She goes immediately for her main blade, but only in a two-handed configuration. We've covered Ahsoka's dueling style extensively in previous videos, but the point is she's most at home using Ataru, a quick and acrobatic form of lightsaber combat that can overwhelm slower and more power-based Force users with Force-based leaps and speed moves. She used this form effectively to score a blow on Darth Vader. And since the Clone Wars, she's always used Jar-Kai, or dual wielding, along with the Ataru, making her an incredibly dangerous foe. But for whatever reason, Ahsoka decides to go with just one saber in two-handed configuration. The only time we ever see her do this is when she's either possessed by the Son or early on during her career. This is not a great sign. This is the equivalent of Tom Brady trying to be a mobile quarterback. Now, I've seen some people say that, oh, maybe she needs a two-handed grip to match Baylan Skoll's power here, but that makes no sense, as she already used Jar-Kai against Darth Vader, who is at least Baylan Skoll's equal in strength. It's possible that Ahsoka is getting old and so has less speed, but then again, all we have to do is take a look at Yoda, who is able to use the Force to make himself incredibly fast. Plus, trying to use strength against strength, especially strength that comes from a much bigger opponent, is really stupid. Also, because Ahsoka is a Jar-Kai practitioner, her primary is quite short and not really designed for two-handed usage. So there's only one real reason why Ahsoka has engaged in this battle in a completely unprepared and irrational way. It's because she's being emotional, just like her old self, just like her old master Anakin. And Baylan, on the other hand, has his guard mode on. He stands erect and stiff. This is a large man who lacks flexibility. He will wait for Ahsoka to come to him and keep himself as well defended as possible. He's regal like Vitiate, upright like a knight of the Round Table. Meanwhile, do you guys see this animalistic hunger in her eyes? Ahsoka's tapping into some kind of rage here. This is not Ahsoka in peace as we've seen her before when facing the Inquisitors, who she's so easily bested. No, Ahsoka is tapping into the dark side, and she's using power moves. She's using Form 5, just like Anakin, and it doesn't seem to be working. And that's because Ahsoka is weak in the dark side. What's even more incredible is that Baylan Skoll, despite looking like Vader, is using Form 3, a shell defense technique generally used by Jedi. And as I mentioned before, how you fight says a lot about who you are as a person, and I don't really think Baylan Skoll wants to kill Ahsoka here.
To kill her would be a shame. There are so few Jedi left.
I keep showing this clip because look at his face. That's remorse. I think he's being serious.
The only reason I'm here is to secure the future.
For you?
Something far greater.
Ambitious.
Necessary.
I too am a true believer of Thrawn, especially Thrawn in the canon novels. He was a very rational and relatively kind individual. And by kind, I don't mean like just small talk or patting you on the back every now and then. Thrawn took a lot of time to make sure that every one of his crew members were well taken care of, that they were trained, and if they did make mistakes, as long as they learned from those mistakes, he was cool with it. He wasn't some kind of evil mastermind. Of course, Thrawn towards the end, and by the end I mean in the Rebel series, does seem to head towards chaos and madness a bit more. Perhaps it's Sidious's influence. But there is a sliver of hope that Thrawn might still be able to redeem some of his honor and not just be a generic bad guy. Perhaps Baylan Skoll could join him, although that's much less of a possibility, I think. Now let's not get too starry-eyed here. Baylan Skoll isn't some light-side, good-hearted individual. He might have some principles, but he's still a cold-blooded murderer. Remember what he did to that New Republic ship? Just because he's kept his cool and he's more strategic doesn't make him the good guy, and it doesn't make Ahsoka the bad girl either. And so, like many Form 3 practitioners, Baylan Skoll also has used Form 4 quite vigorously to keep Ahsoka off balance. Look at the power behind his strokes. But whenever he goes on defense, he falls back into Form 3 and he allows Ahsoka to just flail in front of him and expend her energy. But then the two lock blades and Baylan Skoll finally tells Ahsoka what he thinks of her, and it's not great.
Your legacy, like your master's, was one of death and destruction.
Remember what Kanan said at the beginning of this video about how using a lightsaber is like channeling a funnel of force powers and emotions and energy. You're basically using the lightsaber as a conduit for how you feel inside. And so when these two blades lock together, there's an exchange of feelings and emotions. It's an intimate moment. And so Ahsoka answers Baylan's claim with more anger and a strong kick to the chest. Baylan has succeeded in making her angry. What she does next is even more surprisingly foolish for someone as clever as Ahsoka, who's always cautious and thoughtful in her approach to old age. But now I guess she just snips once again. She rushes, and instead of using the Force to knock over the map, or instead of hitting it with her saber, she reaches into the magic field and tries to grab the map with her bare hands. The injury might not be great, but the pain is distracting, and it breaks Ahsoka's concentration from the Force, and it makes it even harder for her to defend herself against Baylan. Remember, Baylan only has one job, and up until this point, Ahsoka wasn't a huge threat because she never touched the map, but now that she has the map, things change. And for the first time, Baylan starts stringing together a series of fierce blows, even stronger and more aggressive than before. I really think that prior to this, Baylan Skoll was happy with just dueling Ahsoka for fun, for entertainment. Again, I don't think he really wanted to kill her.
It didn't need to come to this.
But now that the map is no longer in place, he lets loose. If what we saw before was a polite sparring session between two masters, now it's just pure rage. And now Ahsoka, who's been driven by anger, is completely out of position. She lacks the strength to carry on, and this is a fatal mistake. Interestingly enough, now that Ahsoka has reverted to her younger, more aggressive, snip self, that's exactly what Anakin calls her when he sees her in the world in between worlds. What's even more interesting is that Darth Vader theme. Is it Anakin who's going dark, or is it Ahsoka who's heading towards the dark side? Now, the sequel trilogy had many duels, and from a choreography standpoint, they were visually extremely interesting and beautiful to look at. For instance, that duel in Snoke's throne room, it was epic. There were so many moving parts. But you can tell that Rian Johnson's understanding of the lore is skin deep. Now let's take a look at the duels that Filoni puts together on the other hand. While they aren't as well choreographed, although this one was pretty awesome. I mean, you have the jumping spin and the rock parkour move. That, by the way, is for all you homies who get bored because lightsaber combat isn't aggressive or acrobatic enough. I guess a lot of people like the prequel style. But anyway, the choreography isn't as epic. The moves not as demanding or cool, but the duel itself is much more like a chess match. There's actually layers and layers of meaning, subtle nods and hints to what's going on in the mind of the participant. And so whether it's the Vader versus Kenobi duel or this Baylan Skoll versus Ahsoka duel, I'm starting to really understand and respect Filoni's approach to these fights a lot more. Today we will be continuing our series by taking a look at all of the lightsaber duels between Obi Wan Kenobi and General Grievous. We'll of course be talking about the evolution in lightsaber combat style by both of these combatants as they try to figure out a better way to defeat the other. Grievous was an extremely formidable fighter responsible for killing over 30 Jedi throughout the course of the Clone Wars. He was one of the biggest threats to the Jedi Order and probably one of the best offensive fighters in all of Star Wars. Obi Wan Kenobi was a master of defensive lightsaber combat forms, making this one of the more intriguing rivalries in all of Star Wars. Since we already did a really in-depth coverage on Obi-Wan Kenobi's backstory and kind of lightsaber form in our Obi Wan Vs Maul video, we're going to kind of skip him and just focus on Grievous's backstory. Grievous is or was a Kaleesh warlord. His people had been enslaved by a horrific insect race known as the Yamri. The Yamri came from the planet of Hook and was technologically much more advanced than the Kaleesh. Grievous and his band of fighters were basically the only Kaleesh resistance fighters able to stand against these insect invaders. And so soon the Kaleesh people started seeing Grievous as their leader, and he would eventually unite all of the Kaleesh against the Hook, drive them off their planet, and then chase them to their own home planet. You see, Grievous didn't just want to kick the Hook off of their planet, he wanted to exterminate them from the galaxy. Unfortunately for him, the Yamri were members of the Galactic Republic, and now that they were facing annihilation, they had pleaded to the Senate and Jedi Order for help. And without much context or understanding of this very weird situation that was going on here, the Republic decides to join forces with the insects and crush the Kaleesh invasion. This leads to the Kaleesh forces being pushed back to their homeworld by a Jedi-led Republic force. Grievous saw many of his warriors die because of the Republic, and he himself barely survived a ship crash during one of these battles. Grievous's body was extremely damaged, but his will to live was so strong that had he been given some medical care immediately, he most likely would have recovered. But unfortunately, the so-called crash had been caused by a bomb planted by Count Dooku. Dooku was looking for a brutal enforcer, and he had plans to enslave the Kaleesh warlord. And so when Dooku recovers Grievous's body, he further damages Grievous so that he'll have to rely on a cybernetic body for the rest of his life. Dooku even transferred some frozen blood to Grievous. He had some from the time he helped murder his former friend Jedi Master Sifo Dyas. And to make matters even worse, when the Kaleesh woke up, Dooku said that the Jedi were the ones who crashed his ship, which is why General Grievous would spend the rest of his life trying to kill Jedi. Grievous's road to recovery was long and painful. I mean, getting used to cybernetic limbs was very difficult. And unfortunately, Sifo Dyas' blood had not given him any force power, so Grievous had to learn how to fight the old-fashioned way. Under the tutelage of Count Dooku, the cyborg would learn every Jedi form, and then even began teaching his personal guards, the IG-100 Magna Guard droids, these techniques as well. Combined with his 4 arms and his intense hatred for the Jedi, General Grievous was now an unstoppable force. In the beginning of the Clone Wars, entire fleets of Republic ships were disappearing. The culprit was the Malevolence, a subjugator-class dreadnought armed with a massive ion cannon which could disable several ships all at once. This super ship, just like General Grievous, was terrorizing the Republic. To make matters worse, the Separatists also captured Senator Padme Amidala and was holding her on the ship. The Republic finally sent a massive fleet after Grievous, which was commanded by Obi Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. But since Anakin was here, there's no way he was going to allow the Republic to destroy the ship on which his wife was being held captive on. So instead, the operation becomes a rescue mission after the Republic manages to destroy the Malevolence's main ion cannon. Obi-Wan and Anakin take a junk freighter and sneak aboard the ship. And while Anakin whisks away his lovely Padme, Obi-Wan Kenobi is left to sabotage the Malevolence's hyperdrive. Unfortunately, he finds General Grievous waiting for him with a trap. The General has carefully laid this trap. He has more than a few dozen droids, including several destroyer droids and B-2 super battle droids. Good news, there aren't any Magna Guard droids just yet. Unlike the rest of our duelists, Grievous always brings backup to his fights to weaken his opponents. This may be why he is so successful at hunting down the Jedi, but could also potentially hide some of his own limitations as well. Obi-Wan quickly avoids all of the incoming droid blaster fire and uses the shields on the droidicas as cover, and he starts rolling the deadly droids like bowling balls at other droids. Obi-Wan is using quite a lot of force powers during this battle. Perhaps he's doing this because he knows that Grievous doesn't really have the ability to counter any of his force powers. The Jedi manages to break contact with Grievous for a moment, but the cyborg quickly catches up to him within the trans system inside of the Malevolence. Grievous doesn't need the Force to do superhuman things, though. His cybernetic body is more than powerful enough to match the Jedi's own movements. Obi-Wan and Grievous quickly lock blades. The Jedi quickly falls back into his classic Form 3 defense and breaks contact once again. His priority right now is to get off this ship. I know this isn't much of a duel, but it's the first of many, and these are two combatants that respect each other, so they'll try to get as much information as they can from this one encounter. The next time Obi-Wan Kenobi sees Grievous is after the Kaleesh cyborg captures Eeth Koth and sends a very direct message to the Jedi Order. He doesn't care about politics. He doesn't care about the Republic at all. All he wants to do is murder Jedi. And so the Jedi sent Obi Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and D. Gallia to hopefully rescue Eth Koth. Since Obi Wan Kenobi has already fought against Grievous, he would serve as bait and distract the cyborg, while Anakin and Adi try to pull off a crazy hyperspace maneuver and sneak onto Grievous' ship to rescue Koth. This time when Grievous reaches Obi Wan Kenobi, he's brought several commando droids along with his infamous Magna Guard droids. In the earlier years of the war, the Magna Guard droids proved to be a huge headache for the Jedi Order, specifically because they were designed just to fight Jedi. Grievous would often let the Magna Guard droids overwhelm an enemy so that he could come in for the killing blow. But once again, Obi Wan Kenobi's Form 3 defense is impervious, even to multiple combatants coming from different directions. Interestingly enough, Obi Wan Kenobi decides to verbally spar with Grievous this time around and tries to throw him off balance, a trick that Asajj Ventress and Maul commonly used on him with varying degrees of success. Obi-Wan insults Grievous, calling him an errand boy for Dooku. He points out that Grievous is nothing more than a mutilated body connected to some scrap metal. Grievous responds that he is in charge of the most powerful droid army in the galaxy, which the Jedi quickly shoots down as a poorly built force with no loyalty or spirit, just programming. Although Grievous doesn't show any outward signs of Obi-Wan's words affecting him, it's clear that it does. The Kaleesh warrior is still struggling with the loss of his own body. He isn't completely comfortable with it just yet, and we all know that he really hated the battle droids underneath his command. He found them inferior to his former warriors when he was still a Kaleesh warlord. Obi-Wan Kenobi was hitting hard, and that really leads to Grievous revealing his second set of arms and lightsabers. With 4 blades, Grievous surprises Obi-Wan and disarms him. Pissing off Grievous kinda backfires. But the Jedi quickly regains his feet and manages to stay just ahead of the cyborg. Obi-Wan manages to end their duel by flinging a Magna Guard droid right at Grievous. Feeling the Force being used against him, Grievous takes this opportunity to run and escape from his ship down to the surface of Salakimai. And the chase ensues there as well, but once again Grievous manages to escape the Jedi. The next time Grievous faces off against Obi-Wan Kenobi will be during the Battle of Kamino. The Separatists manage to launch a brilliant feint over the planet with their fleet while secretly inserting Separatist troops on the planet in the falling debris from their destroyed ships. General Grievous, along with Asajj Ventress, are in charge of disrupting this very important Republic cloning facility on the planet, which is responsible for creating the majority of the clone army. Obi-Wan meets Grievous for the 3rd time in the hallways of the clone barracks. Grievous once again starts off with 2 lightsabers, and Obi-Wan starts in Form 3, but interestingly rushes in to attack. Up until now, Grievous and Obi-Wan have been pretty wary of the other's skill. Despite their very different styles, both individuals are cautious by nature. But Obi-Wan is now on the defensive for the first time and needs to protect Tipica City. This means defeating Grievous. Retreat is not a great option here. Grievous gets more creative with the secondary set of arms and uses it to surprise Obi-Wan. In the past, Grievous has used his primary arms to lock blades with the Jedi and his secondary arm to fire blasters at close range. It's a very hard tactic to stop, and is probably why grappling with someone who has 4 arms is a terrible idea. Stunned Obi-Wan Kenobi is once again tossed. The cyborg's strength is far too great. With Obi-Wan now down on the ground, Grievous takes this moment to talk smack to the Jedi, but he forgets once again Obi-Wan's hidden talent, the Force. Obi-Wan slams the cyborg into the ceiling and then pushes him down the hallway, ending their 3rd fight. But now you guys are probably seeing some patterns in how these 2 individuals are fighting each other. The next time the 2 meet, Obi-Wan Kenobi is attempting to rescue a group of younglings from the pirate Hondo Ohnaka. But General Grievous interrupts his rescue attempt by boarding Obi-Wan Kenobi's ship and challenging him to another duel. This time around, there are plenty of combatants inside the Jedi cruiser's hangar. Grievous tears through a group of clones using his multiple limbs to maximum effect. Obi-Wan tries his best to carry out a good defense and protect his men, but Grievous is like a whirlwind of destruction. The 2 lock swords once again, and Grievous starts out with a painful kick to Obi-Wan's abdomen, which clearly does some damage. Obi-Wan responds by flinging some fuel barrels at the cyborg to buy himself some time to escape. In the last year of the war, General Grievous and Count Dooku carry out a daring attack on the Republic capital and manage to capture the Supreme Chancellor. Obi-Wan and Anakin are sent on a rescue mission and are able to defeat Dooku and free Palpatine, but on their way out, they're all captured and ray-shielded. Grievous brings the 2 Jedi and Chancellor to his bridge. This is a pretty confined area, which is now full of combat droids and Magna Guard droids. After exchanging some pleasantries, R2-D2 triggers a distraction which allows the 2 Jedi to arm themselves with Grievous' lightsabers. Honestly, Grievous needs to figure out a better solution to secure his weapons. The two Jedi quickly engage the Magna Guard droids while a pair of B-1 battle droids move the Chancellor out of harm's way. General Grievous, as usual, allows his droids to do the heavy lifting as he casually escapes. But Anakin manages to save Palpatine, and together the two Jedi wipe out Grievous's remaining bridge crew. Anakin and Obi Wan then corner General Grievous, who now is only wielding an electric staff. Sensing that he's outnumbered and overpowered, Grievous decides to escape into vacuum, one of the benefits of being a cyborg. And for the last time, our cyborg general manages to run off and live another day. The final battle between Grievous and Kenobi happens on the planet of Utapu. Grievous is holed up there with the remaining members of the Separatist Council, and Kenobi's 212th Attack Battalion are ready to carry out an attack against the Separatist forces. Kenobi decides to take an interesting tactic. He knows by this point that General Grievous is probably obsessed with killing him, and so he'll use that to his advantage. Kenobi approaches Grievous all alone at first and distracts him so that his clones can get into position for their assault. This is exactly the opposite of what General Grievous would normally do. He likes having his droids fight first and then he enters the battlefield later. The second Obi-Wan jumps out of hiding to confront Grievous, he's surrounded by battle droids. He's clearly improved his fighting skills since last time and easily dispatches 4 Magna Guard droids with the use of some unsecured heavy machinery. At this point, Grievous could just let his droids gun down Obi-Wan, but the Kalish warrior inside of him can't allow it. Grievous decides to be a man. Droid. Cybernetic Kalish. And faces off against Obi-Wan. This time, he begins with 4 lightsabers and 4 arms. He's not taking any chances against his old adversary. And for a second, it seems like Obi-Wan's Form 3 won't even be able to handle the situation. But Obi-Wan Kenobi recovers quickly, parries, and then falls into Form 4 Ataru, his old Master Qui-Gon Jinn style. It incorporates energetic acrobatic moves and attacks. It's good at keeping the enemy off balance, and if necessary, like in this case, it keeps the enemy at a distance. When Grievous goes on the offensive again, Obi-Wan falls to Form 3, but also tries to counter Grievous's onslaught by attacking the cyborg's hand. Any good fencer will tell you the key to winning a duel safely without exposing yourself is by disabling your enemy's hands. Obi-Wan manages to take out 2 of Grievous's hands, but before anything else can happen, the 212th repel from the ceiling and begin their own attack. Grievous isn't fazed by the reinforcements and is about to press on the attack when Obi-Wan uses the Force once again to push Grievous back. We've already established by this point General Grievous is really afraid of the Force. He doesn't like it. And so the cyborg uses his pause to escape once again. But this time Obi-Wan is ready and hot in pursuit on a giant lizard. Grievous realizes all is lost and is attempting to reach his personal starship so that he can escape the battle. Along the way, Obi-Wan loses his lightsaber, making his job considerably more difficult. But Grievous, who is missing 2 hands, now is also without a lightsaber. The two tangle right before reaching Grievous's ship, and Obi-Wan attempts to attack the cyborg with an energy pike while Grievous is using a blaster. Obi-Wan manages to get a few strikes in, but once he loses his energy pike, the two engage in unarmed combat. Obi-Wan, who isn't made out of metal and anger, can't do any damage against the cyborg, and his death seems imminent. But while grappling, Obi-Wan manages to open up one of the armor plates protecting Grievous's internal organs. And right before Grievous is about to finish Obi-Wan off with an energy pike, the Jedi blasts General Grievous right in the heart, setting him on fire. If you think about it, this is the exact move that Grievous liked to use to kill Jedi back in the day. If that's not poetic justice, I don't know what is. What's really great about Obi-Wan versus Grievous is the fact that these two combatants are so different. Obi-Wan Kenobi loves using the defensive forms of lightsaber combat, and he really relies on the Force to create separation and distance against more powerful Force users or combatants like Grievous. And Grievous is more of an up-close combatant. He likes using his multiple limbs with multiple lightsabers to overwhelm the defenses of his enemies. This was what makes this one of the most interesting rivalries in Star Wars. For an individual mostly known for his diplomatic and strategic abilities, Obi-Wan Kenobi sure gets into a lot of one-on-one duels. As a matter of fact, he's had some really great rivalries throughout his time as a Jedi. This includes multiple fights against Darth Maul, multiple fights against General Grievous, and also Asajj Ventress. But his most famous opponent was always Anakin Skywalker, his former apprentice and now mortal enemy. The two individuals have sparred on numerous occasions during their time within the Jedi Order together, And after Anakin's fall to the dark side, they would proceed to have a trilogy of duels that are as famous as any in the Star Wars lore. And now that the Kenobi series is over, we've been able to see the second battle in this trilogy, and I gotta say, this is one of the best trilogy of duels in all of Star Wars history. In today's video, we're going to take a look at the evolution of these three battles, which are all conveniently spaced 10 years from each other. We're going to take a look at the evolution of combat styles, the mentality of each fighter, and their abilities. What makes the Anakin versus Obi Wan duels so special is the fact that they've trained together for more than a decade. Generally, within the Jedi Order, the Master teaches the apprentice their own preferred lightsaber form. Obi Wan Kenobi originally was a form for Ataru adherents. He was following in the footsteps of his master Qui-Gon Jinn. But after witnessing Qui-Gon Jinn's defeat by Darth Maul using Form 4, Obi-Wan would distance himself away from Ataru and began training himself in Form 3, a more passive and defensive shell technique. Anakin Skywalker would also learn Form 3 as a result, but his impulsive and aggressive nature would lead him to becoming a Form 5 Shen and Jem So style fighter. Form 5 lightsaber technique actually directly evolves from Form 3. Form 3 was all about defense and waiting for your opponents to make a mistake. Form 5 adherents were all about adding additional offensive techniques that could shorten the length of a battle. This is one of the major philosophical differences between Form 3 and Form 5. Form 3 is all about being conservative and patient, whereas Form 5 says that the longer the battle takes, the more opportunities there are for bad things to happen. So they want to end it as quick as possible. Now, Anakin Skywalker, being so naturally gifted in the Force, was a very strong lightsaber fighter. But as a Padawan, he didn't spend that much time practicing his technique, but that would all change after Count Dooku cut his arm off. From then on, Anakin would become a fanatic when it came to lightsaber practice. He would learn all of the different techniques, and he would eventually modify Form 5's basic stance to be more efficient against blaster fire, although his main focus with Form 5 was learning power attacks that could quickly disarm his opponents. Even before Anakin falls to the dark side, there were plenty of signs of his aggressive and darker nature. The Skywalker family in general has a large amount of bloodlust hidden in their personalities, and it just takes the right amount of passion to awaken this kind of darker side of them. A classic Skywalker move that we'll see Anakin and Luke Skywalker do on numerous occasions is just repeated strikes against an enemy's guard that increases in tempo and rage the longer it is unsuccessful. It's the ultimate personification of Anakin's relatively simple mind. He does not look for counters or parries or trick moves. He just wants to blast through his opponents and bury them. The experience with Count Dooku and 3 years on the front lines of the Clone Wars turned Anakin into a killing machine. He already had the natural skill and force powers, and now he had the discipline, practice, and real-world experience to go along with it. Anakin would become one of the most disciplined and focused duelists in the entire Jedi Order, and unlike other powerful Force users, Anakin didn't rely on Force powers during his battles. He generally relied on good swordsmanship. It was all about pure speed, strength, agility, and technique. When Anakin goes up against Obi Wan Kenobi, his former master, during the Mustafar battle, he clearly can't match him physically or through the Force. But luckily, Obi-Wan doesn't need to because he's sparred with Anakin more than anyone alive. The only thing that he hasn't seen from Anakin is what happens to him when he taps into the dark side and uses his anger to fuel his power moves. But take a close look at Obi Wan Kenobi's open stance here right before Anakin jumps into action and starts fighting against him. Obi Wan Kenobi is actually quite relaxed. He's almost opened up his body for Anakin to strike. We have to remember, at this point, this was the first time Obi Wan Kenobi has seen his apprentice since leaving several days ago for the Outer Rim. Even though Obi Wan Kenobi saw Anakin murder a bunch of younglings, lead an assault on the Jedi Temple, and physically abuse his wife, he's still probably not mentally prepared for this battle against his former apprentice. I mean, he even begged Yoda to let him go fight Palpatine instead of Anakin.
Send me to kill the Emperor. I will not kill Anakin.
If you take a look at Obi Wan vs Maul on Tatooine, the Jedi Master falls into Form 3 Ready mode, which involves holding the saber above one's head and turning the body sideways in order to minimize the profile of his body. He was clearly ready to fight with Maul, and in this scene, He's clearly adopted a completely different stance against Anakin. When Anakin starts his attack on Obi-Wan Kenobi, he launches a flurry of combos with both grace and tenacity, and Obi-Wan returns the favor with a blur of defensive parries. If you take a look at actual real-world sword fights, no one is ever able to block so many strikes in a consecutive order. The Jedi were able to do this for two reasons, basically. One, they practiced these basic forms and combos religiously to the point where they remembered them even when punch drunk and badly injured. The second part of this was that the Jedi, when fighting at higher levels and higher speeds, completely let the Force into their bodies and allowed it to control their movements. It's said that the Jedi don't even think during these moments because there is no time. They simply fall into the rhythm of combat. Obi-Wan maintains a defensive posture the entire fight, which is usually what he does anyway. He's waiting for his opponent to make the wrong move, like, say, attack him while he's standing on the high ground, which makes me rethink Obi-Wan Kenobi's opening stance. Maybe he's doing that to goad Anakin into attacking him in the first place. But in order to build up to that moment where Anakin makes a huge error in judgment, all Obi-Wan really has to do is frustrate Anakin by blocking his best efforts and his most intense attacks. Anakin gets so frustrated that at one point he even tries to use a Force push on his master in order to throw him off his guard. But no matter how hard Anakin tries, Obi-Wan Kenobi is always going to be one step ahead of Anakin, and so he manages to stay alive just long enough for Anakin to make that very, very fatal mistake. Okay, we're not going to count Obi-Wan's encounter against Vader on Mapuzo here as a duel. Kenobi spends half that battle running away from Anakin and then gets dragged through some hot coals. What is important about this battle is we see how much Anakin has changed in the 10 years since his gruesome injuries on Mustafar. Vader clearly is a lot slower and he seems to rely more on power strikes. At the same time, Vader heavily uses the Force to control his enemies, something that Anakin rarely ever did. There is a huge difference between the first and second duel from the Kenobi TV series. In the first duel, Obi-Wan Kenobi wasn't ready at all. He was also just on the run by himself. He wasn't trying to protect anyone, which is really important. But the second time around, that changes. Obi-Wan Kenobi makes a conscious choice to separate himself from the members of the Path in order to lure Darth Vader to him. In this second duel, Obi-Wan chooses the battle and why they fight. Right before they start swinging at each other, we notice that Obi-Wan Kenobi has entered his Form 3 ready stance. His demeanor clearly shows that he is not only physically ready, but also mentally ready to do some damage against Vader. It also helps that his former apprentice is clearly a murdering monster and his face is hidden beneath a scary helmet, so we can no longer identify him. This duel is a lot slower than the one we saw in Episode 3. Clearly, these two individuals have not fought against each other in a while. Vader's style has also changed drastically. Vader's had to alter his Form 5 technique because his suit is incredibly heavy. There's a lot of latency and delay on the movements of his cybernetic limbs compared to his actual arms and legs. And plus, you have the limited mobility and the lack of flexibility from his cybernetic limbs. The gaps in between Vader's combos now are noticeable because his speed is so much slower, and this gives Obi-Wan Kenobi the opportunity to counterattack in between strikes. I would say that in previous fights, Anakin was dealing the majority of the offensive strikes. In this fight, it's much closer to 50-50. Obi-Wan Kenobi also seems to be able to redirect Vader relatively easy, keeping the larger fighter off balance. This is classic Form 3 Sarusu mixed with some light martial arts that Obi-Wan Kenobi also learned as a Jedi. It's all about keeping your opponent off balance and then redirecting their strikes to the ground or to the side. When the fight gets into the rock spire area of the location, we can see both fighters are a bit rusty. Obi-Wan begins throwing some wild thrusts and attacks at Vader, which definitely isn't a Form 3 technique style move, and Vader seems to be struggling with the confines of the location. The spires keep intercepting his long-witted moves, which are pretty easy to telegraph. Eventually, Vader does get the upper hand by using the Force to collapse the ground beneath his former master. He then buries him beneath a bunch of rocks. It's at this point Obi-Wan Kenobi goes from just normal him to Super Saiyan Mode 2, maybe? It's because he taps into the foundation of what makes him fight, and it's a beautiful thing. Obi-Wan Kenobi thinks about protecting Leia and Luke, who are ironically the son of Darth Vader. The tables have really flipped in the second duel compared to the first duel. In that first duel, it was Anakin who was fighting for those he loved, even though he did just strangle Padme. But he was the emotional one. And now Obi-Wan Kenobi was using emotions and, dare I say, attachment to the Skywalker twins to fuel his Force powers. This is probably the most passionate we've seen Obi-Wan Kenobi in battle since he took on Maul right after Qui-Gon Jinn was killed. Obi-Wan Kenobi with emotions is almost overpowering. He kind of just goes into God mode and starts offensively using the Force, which is a big deal for a Jedi. It's one thing to Force push a droid, it's a whole nother thing to wrap the Force around your former apprentice and throw him like a rag doll and then fling a bunch of rocks at his face. Vader and Obi-Wan lock blades once again, and now it's even more apparent just how slow Vader is compared to when he was a Jedi. He also seems to be much weaker as well, and he's unable to use his tremendous weight and strength to force his will over Obi-Wan. At one point, Obi-Wan just drops his form completely and starts bashing Vader's respiratory system with the hilt of his saber. This is definitely not Form 3 technique. A few strikes later, and it's completely over. Obi-Wan lands a strike on Vader's helmet, revealing a portion of his burnt face. Obi-Wan Kenobi could have ended Vader, especially after the Sith Lord admitted that the Anakin he once knew was completely gone. Vader had many enemies that would have thanked Obi-Wan for it, but no, instead, Obi-Wan just walks away again. I don't know if this is because he loves Anakin, or maybe he's just a coward, but the second duel does confirm what many of us knew all along, and that's that Obi-Wan would never kill Anakin. And it shouldn't surprise us, because as I've said many times before, Obi-Wan represents all the good the Jedi could have been. Even though Obi-Wan Kenobi is a very dedicated Jedi, his capacity to love has always been something very special about him, and is actually what connects him to Anakin so well, I think. We see that whenever Obi-Wan does disobey the Council, he does it for love. Like when he runs to Satine Kryze's aid when her government is overthrown by Maul, or like when he questions Yoda's order to go and fight Anakin in Episode 3. Obi-Wan's true source of power, just like Harry Potter's, came from his love of others. Whether it's sacrificing his life for the members of the Path or some clone soldiers or the children of his former apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi always fights beyond his own capabilities when something he loves is at stake. By the time Obi-Wan battles Vader for the third and last time, he's only 10 years older from the second time around. Vader will also have aged the same amount of time. We now know about Vader's limitations as a fighter, and I don't think Obi-Wan Kenobi got that much weaker while he was just waiting in the desert. We've seen much older fighters like Count Dooku and Yoda be very, very strong up until their deaths. We know also that Obi-Wan can't kill Vader here because Obi-Wan feels sorry for Anakin and loves him. But Obi-Wan also understands that if he stays amongst the living, Vader will keep coming after him. And every time that Obi-Wan defeats Vader and hurts him, the worse Vader's anger and pain will get. The best thing that Obi-Wan can do in this situation to save Anakin is to actually let Vader kill him. Obi-Wan, as usual, was playing the long game, the extremely long game. By allowing himself to die here, he deprives Vader of the very fuel he needs to keep on going on his path towards the dark side. By dying, he gives Anakin a chance to come back and take over his body.
Okay, quick background. This is the High Republic, guys. The Jedi are going to be the most demilitarized we've ever seen thanks to centuries of peace. They basically are the equivalent of space cops here. I've done 2 videos about the subject if you guys want to check it out further. But the main points are, because of their pacifist ways, the Jedi philosophy has shifted away from training the major forms of lightsaber combat. Many members of the Order, especially higher ranking members, have deemed many of these forms to be too aggressive and too offensive. And this is why we see a lot of non-lethal martial arts and hand-to-hand combat in the series. The Jedi are just so dominant and all-powerful in this period of time that they can afford to do crazy stuff like this. And this can end poorly for the Jedi, like with what happens with Master Undara. And we'll see in this episode, it also ends poorly for a lot of these Jedi. They're just not well-trained and prepared to fight to the death. The Sith, on the other hand, if we can call this guy a Sith, that's a big if, guys. We'll do another video about that where we dive in deeper. But let's just call him Qimir for now. Qimir is kind of an unrefined fighter in a lot of ways, but he's actually a very smart and tactical fighter as well. But I do think his successes in this episode are more due to the Jedi's failures to prepare for the situation rather than his strength. Okay, so let's start at the end of episode 4. The Jedi approach Kelnaka's hut in single file and quickly go into line formation. They don't surround the hut, They stay way too close to one another. There's really not much thought in how they position themselves. Because, again, they think they have everything under control. Now, Qimir, who honestly has a lot of Mary Poppins-like traits, gently floats down from behind. Levitation is no easy feat in the Force. I mean, Yoda could do it, but this, I think, points to the fact that Qimir is quite powerful and potentially Sith. But yeah, the Jedi are completely out of position. Luckily, Qimir takes his time and allows them to turn face. Jedi Master Soul is in a rush to save Osha, and he doesn't give commands to the rest of the Jedi, but it's really cool how they all react to him drawing his blades by drawing their own blades. Visually, this just looks really cool. What is dumb is how Soul rushes headfirst towards Osha, holding a lightsaber instead of using the Force. Kind of reminds me of the first Battle of Geonosis. A lot of Jedi generals ran straight at the heavily entrenched Geonosian lines. A lot of good clones died for no reason. Now, in this case specifically, I attribute this to the Jedi not encountering threats like this, and also just being stunned by seeing a red saber. I'm sure none of them have ever seen one live, at least. They also probably feel the presence of the dark side, which is something they've also never felt. And again, they're acting without thinking because they've been all powerful for so long. Qimir, who has already shown his telekinesis abilities by hovering down from the sky, unleashes a blast at the Jedi as they're running towards him. None of them have their feet planted, none of them can really react in time, and they all go flying. It seems like in one of the next episodes, one of the Jedi is immediately killed, which means that maybe this Jedi was able to hold his ground a little bit, but then was blinded by the red stuff and, Qimir just cut him down. Now we get to the scene where Osha sees Qimir fighting 5 Jedi, including Yoda. This really does remind me a lot of Palpatine's office duel. Palpatine uses Sith Scream to disorient 3 Jedi Masters here and takes them out in literally 5 seconds. Qimir is clearly not even close to Palpatine's power levels at this point, but the guy's smart. He's using the trees to take away the Jedi's advantages in number, and he's able to basically hold them at bay by confining them. Now on this channel, we talk a lot about how the Jedi fight. They're basically almost like unconscious fighters. They fall into the rhythm of the Force.
This time, let go your conscious self and act on instinct.
With the blast shield down, I can't even see. How am I supposed to fight?
Your eyes can deceive you. Don't trust them.
So when you're a Jedi and you're fighting in the correct way, you're not actually thinking, I'm going to strike here, strike there, then I'm going to throw this combo or do a flying somersault. Not really. This isn't even instinctual fighting, it's just the Force guiding you. So being able to meditate, being mentally calm is incredibly important for a Jedi to be able to have good outcomes in a fight. But when you're fighting a Sith Lord, that can be really hard to do, especially if you're not used to fighting a Sith Lord. And Qimir, he immediately uses an ability known as Force Fear, or at least that's what I think he's doing.
It doesn't make sense. He gets into your head and he stays there.
My mother could do that. Get inside a Jedi's head.
So Osha's mother, the Witch Coven, seemed to be able to possess people with either spirits or something else. It's clearly going to link back to the Brendok Fire somehow, which is kind of the catalyst for this entire show. But having said that, I don't see any black pupils here, which is a sign of the witch's nonsense. I tend to look a little closer at the dialogue in this show because there are so many twists and turns and hidden details so far. I mean, that's how we were able to figure out that Qimir was a Sith basically, the first week the show came out. But ultimately, I think Qimir is just using good old Sith mind manipulation here. It also has something to do with the form of lightsaber combat he's using. Now, so if you take a look at these Jedi, not only are their minds getting messed with, which is destroying their connection to the Force and making them actively think about what they're doing, which is terrifying. No one wants to think about dying. It also looks like most of these individuals have not fought together against one assailant, which is problematic. Well, actually, none of these Jedi have ever fought another lightsaber-wielding Force user in anger. Now, the choreography in these type of scenes are going to be hard because, in real life, 5 versus 1 is just not going to end well for the one person. I mean, all 5 people can just stab at the same time. How are you going to block that, right? So in a lot of movies, you get this Assassin's Creed kind of style of combat where one enemy attacks you at a time. Old Assassin's Creed. But they do a good job of concealing this because Qimir moves around a lot and the cinematography here is pretty good. Or smart at least. By shooting this from afar and having the trees kind of block everything, it makes the entire scene look more cluttered and confused and frantic. It's actually hard to follow what's going on unless you slow it down a lot, which is what we do. Now, as far as forms go, the Jedi are pretty basic here. Yoda is clearly the most competent combatant in this group. He's using some Form 5 power strikes, which are pretty easy to discern. Everyone else is just all over the place because of this force fuckery, right? I mean, the Keldor over here, he looks like he's drunk. He's falling all over the place. He looks like he's on the defense, but if you slow down, he's actually on the attack here. And then his second strike is so off target that he turns himself around in Qimir. He hardly even parries him and then just counters, quickly killing him. Then you have the guy with the yellow saber who isn't Yord. This guy is a mess as well. He parries a wide swing from Qimir, but then his follow-up thrust just completely misses the target and hits air. The stunt coordinators for the show really did a good job. I think they worked on The Kingsman before, which is an excellent action film with great fighting. They use a lot of unique camera movement to kind of give you a sense of where things are going. It's really unique looking. And honestly, no one's really replicated since, I don't think. But yeah, these Jedi are completely acting like the Jedi Masters who are under the effect of Palpatine's scream. This is awesome and horrific to watch all at the same time. Now, Qimir, if you take a close look at him, he's not taking advantage of every opening that he creates, and he's creating a lot because these Jedi are stumbling all over the place. Like in this one sequence, he ducks under one of Yord's wilder swings, and he probably could have killed him right then and there. But again, remember, Qimir might be making this look very easy, but he's fighting 5 people with lightsabers, and they're all force sensitive. So he has to really focus. Every time he strikes out, every time he attacks, he leaves himself open, and he's actually on the defensive this entire time, although it doesn't look like it. But if you slow it down, he's definitely on the defensive.
He doesn't follow the rules of combat, and there's no method to his movements.
Yord might be onto something here. Either Qimir is some Boken dark Jedi without much training in actual lightsaber forms, or he has very basic training and is just an instinctual fighter who has immense dark side powers. Now in this opening fight scene, Qimir kind of seems really in his element, and he's actually using some Form 2 Makasi dual movements. Form 2 Makasi is all about good footwork, avoiding heavy blows, and parrying to re-deflect energy away from your own body. I mean, he's nowhere near as good as Dooku was, but, you know, he also has very violent and agile energy here. Also, Makasi is usually not good against multiple opponents, so it's impressive that he's using it here. But at the same time, Qimir is also mixing in that Form 7 Juyo, which is kind of a forbidden lightsaber form. I mean, there is like a light side version that Mace Windu uses, but for the most part, the Jedi of the High Republic era definitely don't know about this. This is a form used by Palpatine, Maul, and this technique uses the fighter's passion and emotions to fuel their attacks. And it's all about drawing on negativity and fear from their surroundings, which can serve as a passive buff that really confuses the Jedi, and the more confused and scared the Jedi become, the more powerful the Sith become. So if you have a bunch of weak-minded Jedi, and most of these Jedi seem kind of weak, that's just fuel for Qimir. The only people who can stand up against this are basically Jeki, Yord, and Skoll. This next move from Qimir here is a Makasi wrist movement to break the lightsaber lock. When you lock lightsabers with someone, you're basically connecting through the force with them. It's a great time to exchange one-liners and to just, generally shit talk. What happens next is honestly one of my favorite moves I've seen in this episode. In Star Wars we get a lot of lightsaber battles, but we oftentimes don't get new stuff that looks cool, okay? Just doesn't happen often. Like, you remember the whole using the force to stop the lightsaber thing? It's just visually not cool. But Qimir actively seeking his enemy's blade with his Cortosis brace, which then deactivates that blade, and then headbutting another lightsaber. It's completely reckless and brutal. I mean, what more can you ask from a Sith Lord here? This is really cool. Also, I like that Qimir only pulls this move out because these two Jedi work well together against him, or at least they're the only ones so far that seem to work together at all, and they have Qimir on his back foot. If you guys want more information about Cortosis, our last video basically covers that. This is a really cool material they not recently, but a few years ago they brought in from Legends. It's like an alloy. Very cool. Next, Yord comes in with the block here, saving this other Jedi for a second. I know people find him cheesy, and he is kind of silly, but, Yord is Yord. I like the guy. I just imagine Qimir trying to connect with Yord's mind in the scene here, and all Yord is, thinking about is his hair or something. No, I'm just kidding. The guy has courage, and I respect him. I really like him as a character. Liked him. But as soon as that lock breaks, Qimir withdraws his blade. Yord has an opening, but he doesn't go for it. Instead, he puts himself in a weird position with his blade, and he almost misses the next parry. His footwork is completely off balance, and then Qimir almost goes like Form 5 and Form 7 power strikes and puts Yord on his ass. This move reminds me a lot of Count Dooku's move on Anakin where he cuts his arm off. And the injury to Yord's leg, well, that reminds me of Count Dooku's strike on Obi Wan Kenobi. Yord is lucky though because the timing is just about right. The two Jedi who had their lightsabers extinguished by the cortosis are now back in the fight. The guy with the yellow blade here is just terrible though. He is so slow. He gets one overhead slash in and Qimir just hits him with a combo and he barely manages to hold that off. Then the pair come back at Qimir from both sides, but he's just too quick. This could be the Geos speaking. I mean, the dark side of the Force is very strong with this guy. And it's basically slowing down the Jedi, making them less decisive and making him faster and stronger. I mean, that quick kick to counter the strike here is just awesome. And when you actually slow this scene down, Qimir is very impressive. He's just a whirlwind of light with that giant lightsaber in his hand, and he switches from two-handed grip to single-handed grip seamlessly, depending on where he needs the lightsaber to go. And of course, that shish kebab move is just the icing on the cake. It's absolutely brutal. This is his style. Now we're going to skip the Jackie and May fight. I love the drop kick, but I want to focus more on lightsaber fighting here. So next up, we have Skoll versus Qimir. This is the main showdown here. These are the two most powerful, probably the most powerful Force users on the battlefield. It all starts with a classic lightsaber throw, very Sith-like. Next, what is interesting is the stance that Master Skoll takes in the beginning. This is classic Form 1 Shicho. This is a very basic form, but it's also a good way to start your fight because it doesn't expose what your preferences are. It should also be stated that Master Skoll is clearly a very wise and clear-headed Jedi, at least right now. You know, individuals like him are very well connected to the Force, and so if you're gonna fight someone like this, you have to try to unsettle them. Qimir attacks first, and it's sloppy. This is clearly a Juyo misdirection kind of move. A downward slash that starts from one angle and is supposed to throw off the opponent's guard. And then Qimir is supposed to basically redirect mid-swing and attack. But Qimir puts way too much force in that initial blow and he lunges too far. The Juyo works well in a crowd of newbies who are panicking, but Master Skoll is still calm here. He's doing okay. And actually, unlike the previous scene where Qimir was on the defensive and countering the crap out of people, Skoll is now on the defensive. He doesn't fall for that feint, and instead he already has his blade up in position to intercept that second angle. Skoll manages to keep up with Qimir step after step as he presses in on him with high and low slashes, and then Skoll ends the encounter by knocking Qimir away with his first offensive slash. Qimir is just probing Skoll right now, and Skoll just finding his foundation, his legs. In this next exchange, Skoll is on the attack, and he's got more control and efficiency in his movements than Qimir. He's clearly the more disciplined fighter, and as he probes Qimir, he pushes him back as well. But this is still basic Form 1 slashing attacks, which is not surprising for a Jedi of his era, but still very predictable. One thing I really like here is the focus on the footwork from the camera. This is a special type of Japanese martial arts running that is specifically used when an individual is engaged in combat and wielding a weapon. You see the body tilt, you're leaning forward basically, which allows your feet to shuffle forward and have constant contact to the ground. Your knees are also bent in this running style. This gives you the ability to move around and shift directions. It also keeps your upper body kind of disconnected with your legs. It's like almost a gimbal effect. It looks silly. You see it a lot with ninja movies and samurai films. But trust me, try running around with a sword in a ready position. It's not easy. You know, the old Star Wars duels were very impactful and cool for their times, but the lightsaber fights here are becoming increasingly steeped in actual real-life martial arts, in this case, Eastern martial arts and samurai tradition. I mean, you guys remember the Ahsoka training scenes with the tatami mats? I think this kind of stuff, this kind of culture really grounds the combat, makes it feel more realistic. And the minimal use of wires and, over-the-top stunts in the Acolyte also makes the fighting seem more realistic when compared to the prequels. The prequels were cool, but they were really just over the top. I mean, those are clearly more powerful fighters than what we see here. Now, after the next exchange of words, Skoll becomes more flustered.
You trained May. Show your face.
And let you read my thoughts. No.
What master hides his face from his pupil?
You tell me.
If you're going to tell by Skoll's expression, he's starting to get pissed. I mean, Skoll's got a lot of heart, which means he also has a lot of passion, and that can really go both ways. And Qimir, well, he's a Sith, and he really needs to feed off of that emotion from Skoll, if possible. And in the next exchange, you can see that he's becoming more powerful and ends the next flurry of strikes with a solid kick. Now, Qimir doesn't kill Skoll here. He has to go and save May, who's fighting Jackie. Jackie's in a bad position when she gets attacked, but she unsheathes her weapon just in time to block a vicious strike that was probably designed to decapitate her. Qimir probably thinks she's just another scrub, but this Padawan here has strokes of Ahsoka Tano. There's that confidence, a bit of rage. Some Jedi, when they start getting mad in the middle of a battle, they become flustered. Some Jedi, like Anakin, they actually become stronger. They're basically tapping into the dark side, technically. And I would argue that such fighters are hybrid fighters that understand how to properly use their emotions to their advantage when fighting. This is actually the dark side that the High Republic is afraid of, and this is why they kind of want to move away from traditional lightsaber forms and just use Niman, which is more like force heavy kind of a martial arts form. Now, Qimir is overextending himself with these power strikes, but when he connects with a smaller Padawan, she is getting tossed around a bit. It's a good strategy for Qimir, and he ends this sequence with a kick again. This is what I think Yord means when he says he doesn't follow the rules. Qimir's, basically street fighting, Krav Maga. He's taking every opening possible and trying to hit his opponent with whatever limb or weapon he has in his hands. Jecki gets to sit down for a second. I mean, I'm impressed that she didn't die here. She barely had any warning she was going to get attacked. And I think Qimir also readjusts here because I think he respects the young Padawan's heart. He's also looking for an acolyte now that his old one is broken. Jecki goes on the attack next, and her first two swings are wild and exaggerated, and then she kind of leaps off this rock for an overhand strike. That, ladies and gents, is a Taru. The thing that got Qui-Gon Jinn killed. It's a very acrobatic and force-intensive kind of lightsaber form. Use the force to fuel your movements, which usually includes like acrobatic moves. It's basically all over the place. I call it the capoeira of Star Wars lightsaber combat. It's high risk, but also high reward, as she almost gets a strike on Qimir immediately. But he strategically places the Cortosis brace on his weak hand and takes out Jecki's lightsaber. This sucks because now she has to use Kelnaka's saber, but how she does it is really cool. Now, sometimes the fights are so fast on screen you can't really see what's going on. I mean, a lot of the prequel duels were like that. I feel like they actually had to slow stuff down so the audience could understand. But, when you have 24 frames per second, it's really hard to see anything. But if you take a close look here, Jecki flips the broken saber from her strong hand to her offhand and then summons Kelnaka's sabers at the same time into her strong hand. That's a really subtle move, and I like it a lot. She also has the extinguished lightsaber on her offhand in a reverse grip. Classic Jarkai mode a la Ahsoka Tano. I love when the lightsaber turns on again and the expression on her face when she sees it. It's go time. At this point, Jecki does something very similar to Anakin in his duel with Dooku, which is Jarkai plus a Taru. This is not an easy combination, but this kind of viciousness is not something that Qimir expects. And for the first time, he's kind of off balance, like Maul versus Obi Wan. Qimir is really not used to being on the defensive, especially against such a aggressive, intense attack. It's like watching Tyson Fury go after Wilder. Padawans are not supposed to be this powerful, especially one with limited combat experience. I mean, not even Ahsoka was this advanced, which tells me that Qimir is most likely not a really strong fighter. Now, even when Qimir goes on the attack, the double wind move by Jecki is solid. Again, it's very similar to Anakin's Ataru form, but then just like Anakin, she loses one of the lightsabers. Probably Kelnaka's, because it's a bigger target. I really don't like the disappearance of Qimir here. I guess that is kind of the Sith's thing, but transitions between these fights have been a little bit wonky, but they usually are, I feel like. So when Jecki and Skoll team up to go after Qimir, we really finally see this dark side force user get pressed. And both Jedi start mimicking Qimir's former moves and just start kicking the crap out of him, breaking his rhythm and defenses. These two are Padawan and Master, and they definitely know how to pour on the pain consistently together. It's a lot of fun to watch. But whenever Qimir struggles, he uses his head, his Cortosis head, and this leads to Skoll getting some punches in because his lightsaber is disabled. And I feel like this is kind of rage-induced melee fighting. It is also survival mode at the same time, but I don't like how Jecki kind of just slides away. But once these two disengage, Jecki leaps back in, and this is the most furious we've seen her. Her movement and her speed are on par with what we see with Anakin and Obi Wan Kenobi's duel, but she's also for the first time losing control of herself, at which point Qimir goes for the Shoto Blade. Qimir is not the best fighter. Again, he almost got destroyed by this Padawan, but he's smart. He knows how to think tactically. He knows the weaknesses of these Jedi. Skoll by this point is so pissed that he's goaded into striking Qimir when he's not looking. Qimir kind of just casually fends him off. It's cold. Jedi Master Skoll is really unbalanced here. He's doing stupid things. He's getting flustered. At this point, Yord comes in like Yord does, and he gets his lightsaber deactivated immediately. But he also manages to use the Cortosis helm to deactivate Qimir's blade. Once face to face, though, Yord is not prepared to look evil in the eyes and kill. But Qimir is. Now, Skoll by this point is furious. He engages Qimir in hand-to-hand combat. By this point, it's really just personal, I think. And Skoll is, changing before our eyes, as we talked about in previous videos. Whatever he did all those years back on Brendok, well, he's connecting with that dark past too. But still, as a Jedi Master, he can't kill Qimir, and so Qimir gets Mary Poppined away by a bunch of mods. The fights themselves, again, are great. The disengagement after these fights, these transitions are But I should point out here, I think the entire purpose of this fight was really to just get Soul completely flustered, so he doesn't even realize that May has switched places with his Padawan. Former Padawan.